Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Donnie Adams from the University of Malaya, Malaysia, and thank you for your time and attention, and especially for your presence in this afternoon. I'll be sharing about a very pertinent topic, especially in the context of Malaysia, on inclusive school leadership practices. And this topic is fairly new, especially in the research area, and particularly in the context of hierarchical systems such as Malaysia. Let me begin about the introduction, and I'll try to make this as brief, even though mine will not be as brief as Nicole's presentation, but I'll try to make it as brief as possible. First of all, let's talk about a normal child. When we talk about in an educational setting, when we consider students as a normal child, a normal student, they are able to progress academically, they're able to progress through the curriculum in a normal way. But when we see that students that escape this standard, escape these expectations, they are more likely to be labeled as a special child. So in terms of special needs, in the terms of special education, it is often refers to children who needs special assistance, who needs a special curriculum, who are having disabilities, especially in terms of learning difficulties as well. And this is a definition that has been provided by UNESCO. So when you talk about special education, I've given a portrayal of four different areas here. We have the scope of exclusion. So you could see that people with disabilities and people with special education are in the categories of exclusion. And in the oval shape, you have people that are normal. And then you have talk about segregation. You have in the oval shape normal people. But at the same time, you have people with disabilities and special education in another group. So they belong to community each. They are not mixing together, but they are separate communities altogether. And we talk about integration. There is some form of mixture between people with disability and people with special education with the normal society. But at the same time, in the scope of integration, there are limited opportunities for face-to-face and interaction and social connections between the community. And we talk about inclusion. Inclusion is about them being together in the classrooms, inside and outside the classrooms, and at all times. So the particular focus of this presentation is going to look at inclusion. But for us to look at inclusion, we also need to understand about the various terms that has been used consistently when we talk about inclusive education, about exclusion, segregation, integration, and then finally we arrive at inclusion. What is inclusive schooling in Malaysia? So we have a Malaysian education blueprint, and this is an educational policy document that was formulated by the Ministry of Education. And we do have a long-term goal. It began in 2013, and it ends in another 2 years' time, in 2025, before we formulate a new educational policy. And in this policy, we have a particular focus. We have 11 shifts. We have 11 areas of focus. Varying from student learning, teacher professional development, school effectiveness, student achievements. There's so many focus, but a particular focus, especially on inclusive education, is highlighted in this blueprint. And here you could see that one of the aims that has been outlined in Malaysia is to actually provide every student with disability access to high quality education, relevant education, and most particularly not just education that is tailored particularly to their needs. And to enable this, we need to also have a focus on the teachers. And the idea is to equip teachers with the necessary knowledge so that by 2025, we will be able to have 75% of students with disabilities enrolled in inclusive education programs. Now, this was a target in 2013. Now we are in 2023 and we are just 2 years short of the 2025. Anyone would like to give a rough guess? What is the percentage like in Malaysia in terms of inclusion? The target is 75%. 2023, what is the percentage like? Anyone like to give a rough guess? 80%. 80%? 50%? Thank you. Far off. Any second try? 20%? Yeah, we are almost there. We are at 21%. So we could see that we are still very far away from the ideal target of 75%, which is just another 2 years down the road in 2025. So that's why that's important for us to do a research, particularly on this topic, on the inclusive school leadership. And this was inspired mainly of the policy that was launched recently in Malaysia. We call it the zero reject policy. And the Ministry of Education launched this policy is to encourage students with special education needs to be enrolled and registered in government schools. So before this policy was launched in 2019, the schools, government schools, had the decision making or the autonomy to reject students. So they could say that we don't want this student, we don't want that student. So the principals could make such decisions. But in 2019, the whole thing has changed, the whole landscape has changed, and the schools no longer have autonomy to reject the students. So as a student is identified as a special needs student, then they are automatically accepted in school. So now from going from a landscape of having options to a landscape that has no options. So you could see that there has been a drastic change in terms of enrollment of students with special needs in schools, in which when the policy was implemented in 2019, in just that year, we have 10,948 students registered just for that year into the normal schools. So we can see that there is a need to equip schools with more facilities to train and recruit more special education teachers. But when we talk about successful inclusive school, we are also looking at leadership, because leadership is important and vital in terms of leading the teachers, in terms of leading the learning in the schools. And we could see that when we talk about inclusive leadership, their success and welfare of the students are part of the roles and responsibilities of the school leader. And when we look at school leadership for inclusive education, when we look at the literature and we look at past research, school leadership has proven, has been shown to have a very great influence, especially on student learning outcomes. And when school leaders particularly focus on areas such as instructional issues, administrative support for special education, they look at professional development for teachers, we can see that they have proven to enhance student outcomes, especially in the scope of students with disabilities and special education. So the research objective is to literally investigate what are the principles inclusive leadership practices, and we are focusing particularly in the Malaysian secondary school context. We use a phonological case study method, and the reason of using a phonological case study is we wanted to look into the principals' personal knowledge and experiences of leading inclusive schools themselves. And it was a semi-structured interview, and it was a small-scale study. We looked at principals who have led an inclusive school with at least 3 years of experience and more. And here are some of the findings. So we gathered there are 5 teams altogether. So first thing is principals shared that it's important for them to establish and convey their vision to the teachers, to the students, and to the school committee. But in this aspect, we could see that some of the findings here is not their vision. The vision that they are conveying is the vision from the Ministry of Education. Yeah? So they are conveying the Ministry of Education's vision that has been outlined in a particular guidebook, and they're just briefing and constantly reminding the teachers, the parents, and the school committee about what it's meant to be an inclusive school. And here we could see that the next thing, they are particularly emphasizing on connecting with external communities and parties, and to get there. And when we get parents on board and get their involvement, they are working very closely with the district education officers. They are working very closely with the state education officers as well. And one of the crucial factors that was highlighted is that parents were regarded as a very significant factor, as a very significant element in the implementation of inclusive education practices. And when we talk about connecting with parents here, it's not just parents of students with special education needs or disabilities, parents with students who are normal, parents with students from the mainstream education. So two sets of parents: parents with child with disabilities or special education, and parents whose child is normal. So the connection has to be there with two sets of parents. And when you look at the third theme, this is very much related to the second theme as well. The idea is to create a supportive learning organization. And when we talk about creating an learning organization, there is an involvement of many parties involved. The first thing is each principals ensure that they actually have a committee in the school. They have a group of people that involves the school counselors, that involves the special education teachers, involves the mainstream teachers, involves the disciplinary teacher, involves the parents inside there as well. And this idea is to actually establish a good working relationship. Because one of the tensions in our Malaysian schools is that as much as we have an inclusive education school, there are tensions that teachers from the mainstream education have conflicts and tensions working with the special education teachers. They find it difficult to work together, find a common platform in which they could run programs together, in which special education children with disabilities could mix and mingle with the mainstream education students. They find it difficult to work and understand one another. As much as the mainstream education teacher is there, but her job is, or his job is, to complete the syllabus and ensure that the students are ready for examination. But the special education teacher is there to support and to ensure that the child actually is able to learn what is being taught in the classroom. So due to this respective roles and functionalities, there are tensions there. And the idea is to create good relationships among them, to encourage teamwork, to encourage good communication skills, and most importantly, one of the things that the principals do quite well there is to motivate the teachers that inclusive education is possible. There are much challenges, and to motivate the students themselves, to let the special education students know that they can actually learn. They are not special. There's nothing that forbids them from getting the education that they need. It's just that they need assistance along the way. So there are plenty of motivations given to teachers and students as well. And the next thing is to involve in students' learning. So principals themselves are involved in the students' learning. So often we see in school leadership practices, the principals are the one that directs, or the one that leads, and you have multiple teachers or multiple leaders in the school that is literally enacting the rules and enacting the practices. But in terms of the principals, they themselves are involved, and they know literally what is happening in the inclusive classrooms. They know what their teachers are literally doing in the classrooms. And when they know what are the issues that are involved in the classrooms, they are able to identify what the sort of issues and come up with the respective solutions to ensure that the teaching and learning is effective in the classrooms. And most importantly, as a school leader, they are able to provide very good constructive feedbacks to teachers and take necessary improvements and interventions where it's necessary. And finally, it's about facilitate high quality learning experiences. And one of the things that the principals did was to introduce the buddy system. Now, this buddy system is an initiative to help students cultivate social interaction, to cultivate friendships among them. So the idea is to partner them with an able peer, with a normal peer, and when you pair them together, there is often coaching, and often there is the normal peer that is helping the special education peer, and you feel that in this whole ecosystem of peer buddy system, the special education child feels much needed, and feels much involved, and feels much part of the school as well. So that is the idea, is to cultivate that interaction and friendship among students outside of the classroom, so that that interaction and friendship transfers back into the classroom, in which they help one another, not just in academically, but also socially as well. So this will be the model. Oops, I think something is wrong with the blue. So there are 5 themes here: establishing and conveying the vision, connecting with external communities, specifically for parents, creating a supportive learning organization, involving in the students learning themselves, and most importantly, facilitating high quality learning experience. So this will be the model that we have gathered from the study and some of the implications. So the inclusion practices in school is highly dependent on the school leadership practices, and otherwise, without the involvement of the school leader, we believe that inclusion will remain a fantasy in Malaysia. And promoting the notion of inclusive school leadership is helpful, but school leaders themselves, they must be prepared with the challenges. They must be aware of the challenges and they must be prepared and most importantly, overcome the challenges. And as an inclusive leader, they are required to build relationships, raise awareness among the school community about what is meant as disabled and how could we support the disabled community in the schools. And most importantly, in the process of building and raising awareness is for us to be aware and acknowledge that there are cultural and political differences between the countries, between the nationalities in the school, and we need to also ensure that the success or failures in developing an effective inclusive schools are also considering the cultural and political differences. So that's it for me. Gracias and for listening. I welcome any questions, and those of you who are into inclusive school leadership research or doing leadership in inclusive schools or special education schools, I'll be very interested to connect with you and do a comparative study. And I also like to acknowledge that this research was funded by the Ministry of Higher Education in Malaysia under the Fundamental Research Grant Scheme. Thank you.